Hey guys, this is Jeff Stanek with Figured Out Baseball. We've got a great Figured Out Baseball podcast for you today. We are being joined today by an assistant coach at Charleston Southern, a Division I school in South Carolina. His name is Lukas Ray. Lukas coaches the catchers and works with hitters and also coaches first base at Charleston Southern. I'll tell you a little bit more about him, give you more on his background before we jump into questions with him. He also is a contributor on Figured Out Baseball. He's got some really great videos, which we'll probably get into as well in a little bit. But Lukas played at, collegiately, played at USC Lancaster, which is an NCAA Division I in Lancaster, South Carolina. While he was there, he was part of the 2015 Region 10 tournament championship team. He started his coaching career in 2017, where he became an assistant coach at USC Lancaster. In 2017, the team won the regular season Region 10 title. They finished second in the Eastern District that year and had a future fourth-round draft pick. He went from Lancaster to NC State and was a fourth-rounder out of NC State. In 2018, Coach Ray was the pitching coach and recruiting coordinator at Florence Darlington Tech, which is also a Division I junior college in the same conference, actually, as Lancaster. They are located in Florence, South Carolina. In 2018, Florence Darlington Tech won the Region 10 regular season title. They finished with a team ERA of 2.83. That was the sixth best ERA in the country. They had an 11th round draft pick on that team who was a pitcher. They had another pitcher on that team who was named the Region 10 Pitcher of the Year. They also had a recruiting class that was ranked third nationally for all junior college schools, and that included a 22nd round draft pick out of high school. In 2019, Coach Ray went back to be the pitching coach recruiting coordinator at USC Lancaster. That team finished with a final record of 30-16. And then this past offseason, he was hired at Charleston Southern. He will coach the 2020 season at Charleston Southern for the first time. Again, at Charleston Southern, he will coach the catchers, work with hitters, and coach first base during the games. He's also spent some summers coaching in some summer collegiate leagues. He's a young guy with a lot of passion, a lot of energy. And Lukas, we just appreciate you spending some time with us today here on the podcast.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
I guess one of the first things I'd like to get into is just what you've done with Figured Out Baseball so far. Talk a little bit about your videos before we kind of get into some other stuff. But you've shot some catching video for us, which has been it's really good stuff, and you seem to do a really good job with the catchers at Charleston Southern. And it was funny that you and we kind of connected on social media, and it didn't take long for you to buy into the idea and decide you wanted to put some videos on the website. If you don't mind me just starting there, Lukas, I'd like for you to be able to tell people, what it was about the website that drew you in and made you decide that you wanted to be a part of it.
Yes, sir. I mean, first off, I really respect what you're doing with Figured Out Baseball and the online database. These days in baseball and when young kids are trying to get better at the game and develop their craft, you have all these camps that cost just buku's amount of money, and this website with the videos allows them to go on, see the video, watch the drill, reenact it, and then go do it. And they can take it to their coach, they can take it to their travel organization, the recreation department, they can take it to the high school program. Just a wide variety of what they can do with the info that they are given from collegiate coaches on the internet. And it's absolutely outstanding. It's a great thing for the young game of baseball, great thing for development. And shooting the videos, it helps me out get better at how I'm communicating and being effective in my communication and words with our guys. Just because I have to make sure that everybody understands every little detail. And sometimes you leave that out and you know what you're trying to say in your head, but you got to figure out how to effectively communicate it to the guys so they understand what you're trying to get them to do or the point of view you're trying to get them to see.
I know with a lot of the videos on the website, I go back to coaches and just ask for a little more detail here, a little more detail there, and a lot of times it's much more than they're used to giving for their players because they're working with with college athletes who already have a pretty good base of knowledge, and we try to cover things, for people that just don't really have that background and try to use, language and terminology that everybody can understand. We try to go into a level of detail that's maybe a step above what you're used to, and for some coaches it's like, boy, I really hadn't thought about that in a while, or like not quite sure how to phrase that. Like my guys all understand it, so I think it makes some coaches think a little bit more than they're maybe used to thinking, which is probably good for them, and like you said, good for their communication with their own players in the long run. If you so you shot your videos on catching. Catching, you've told me before, catching is your passion, though you've been a pitching coach at several of your stops. When you interviewed for Charleston Southern, did you interview as someone with a pitching background, a catching background, a little bit of both? Did they give you any choice of what you worked with, or did you come in here, saying like, I'd really like to work with catchers if there's an opportunity?
It was pretty much a mixture of both. Coach Schaefer is an outstanding guy with a lot of passion of the game and passion for development. And basically I came in with an open mind of saying, tell me what I need to do to help the program. I've always kind of fit that mold when I played as a team player. And it sounds cliche, but it's honestly, how I view the subject. I'm always just trying to do whatever it takes to ultimately better the program and better the experience for the players. They kind of gave me the option that the catchers needed someone to work with and come in and dive in on a daily basis. And I basically took it and ran with it. Like you said, catching's my passion. I have the pitching background, so it kind of it helps coach catchers a little better, just because I see it from a pitching point of view and I see it from a catching point of view because I was a catcher when I played. So I kind of merge those two together, and ultimately we find the best way to handle our pitching staff and perfect our game back there and ultimately try to impact the game at the biggest level that we can.
Your passion for catching is pretty obvious when you watch your videos. When you're working with your players from day to day, what are some of the most important things that you focus on? Obviously, you shot your video on what you shot it on, and I would encourage guys, anybody listening to this, to go to the website, figuredoutbaseball.com. You can see all of Lucas's videos for free, as well as a bunch of other coaches. More than 30 coaches have video on the website now. We have hundreds of videos that are available for free. But if you go to check out your videos, again, it's pretty evident to see the passion. But what do you spend the most time with on your catchers when you're working with your catchers day to day? What are you most focused on with them?
Of course, yeah. The biggest thing that we're focused on a daily basis is trying to mimic the game and mimic the skills that we do in the game the most. When you look at the numbers of things that happen in the game for catchers, I'll dive in a little bit to the numbers of all pitches that were taken. So these are all pitches that weren't fouled off, weren't put in play, everything to do with a catcher enacting on the ball. 84% of the pitches that were taken in our fall 2019 season at Charleston Southern were received. So ultimately, a catcher had an opportunity to, you can call it steal, strike, frame, whatever terminology that you want to use. The remaining 14% or 15% were blocking opportunities, where we got down on two knees, got down on one knee, whether we gloved it, wild pitch, whatever you want to call it. It was just a blocking opportunity to keep the ball in front. And then right under 2%, but right above 1%, were stealing opportunities where we tried to throw guys out at second, try to throw guys out stealing third, or try to back pick somebody. So when we talk about what we look at on a daily basis, it's kind of let's mirror what's going to happen in the game so ultimately we can make the biggest impact on the game. So, and that reflects on our stance of how we get down back there. I guess you can say I'm a big one knee guy. I love catching off of one knee, and it's not one stance for each guy. It's a different stance for every guy because when you think about it, you have a 6'4", 225-pound catcher, and then you have a 5'11", 190-pound catcher. Both of their mobilities are different. So it's kind of why do you ask them to catch the same way if their flexibility is different, their strengths are different, their hand strengths are different. So it's kind of we try to mirror the game. We get into a optimal receiving stance. We keep that receiving first mindset, because if you, just for example, and this kind of goes into what we do on a drill basis, because we're trying to, we have drills, we have progressions where we tone in and we focus on that one skill. We focus on receiving the low pitch, or we focus on blocking the pitch to our extension side, to our throwing arm side. But a lot of our drills are mimicking game situations. They'll get down. I'll tell them, runner on second, it's a 1-2 count, and here comes right-handed breaking balls. And they obviously react to the breaking ball, whether it's going to be in the air or in the dirt. And it's kind of a staying in that receiving first mindset, because it's a 1-2 count. If we stay in that receiving first stance and we don't get too caught up in trying to make sure that we block this ball, we can ultimately win the pitch at the bottom of the zone, and we have a chance to end that bat with a strikeout because we worked hard to receive the pitch, rather than, getting ourselves worked up and being anxious and ultimately trying to block a ball when we could have won the pitch in the receiving, I guess our thumb underneath and getting up underneath it. So that's kind of what we look at on a daily basis. We do a lot of receiving work, just because that's, if you look at StatCast and all these MLB numbers, that's where catchers can impact the game the most, and steal strikes and help handle a pitching staff. So that's kind of, we look at those numbers. That's how we formulate what we're going to do on a daily basis. And then we break it down into priorities, and that's kind of what we're going to be as catchers, and that's our identity of what we're going to be behind the plate. Ultimately we're going to handle the pitching staff first. That's our bread and butter. That's what we're here for. We're here to catch this guy, instill confidence in him so he can throw that 1-2 breaking ball and not spike it or not let it back up on him, and then the guy gets a double. We're trying to make the pitcher better, and that's the only reason that we're back there. And handling a pitching staff goes into the skills, receiving first, blocking second, throwing guys out third, and then all the other situations, whether it may be a field and a bunt, a pop-up, a tag play at the plate. A lot of those are huge run-saving opportunities, but they don't happen frequently. So we still practice them, but we just don't practice them at a high-frequency basis as we do receiving and blocking, if that makes sense.
It does, and I have a lot of questions about that, a lot of things to get into, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I think it's a great conversation, and I want to get into stuff. I want to ask you some kind of tougher questions about some of this stuff, and kind of see where we land on it. So receiving, you said, in just from your own fall stats, 84% of all the pitches that weren't put in play where the catcher actually had a chance to handle the ball, they were just receiving opportunities, nothing else happened. That's primarily why you guys worked on receiving a lot. I've heard that from quite a few catching coaches recently. The game continues to progress, and if you follow social media enough, you kind of see like what's trendy, what guys are focused on, especially and with catching. You mentioned a couple things that are becoming more like in vogue. One of them is to spend a lot more time on receiving. Another one is a lot of the one-knee receiving that you see, and I'd love to talk about both of those things just to give people that are listening, a little more in-depth insight into some of this stuff. But I want to start with the receiving part of it and the amount of time spent on receiving. Would it be fair or unfair for someone to say that I don't want to spend, just say we're going to break it down exactly, or close to, how much this stuff's actually used in a game. You just say you're going to spend 80% of your time on receiving, 15% of your time on blocking, and 5% on, throwing runners out, as far as how much time you're spending with guys on practice, because that's kind of how it plays out in an actual game. How would you react to someone who says, well, receiving is the easiest part of that, blocking is a lot more difficult than receiving, throwing guys out is a lot more difficult than receiving, so I'm going to split my time a little more evenly between those three? What would you say to a coach who had that sort of a perspective compared to, someone who said, well, 85% of our time is just spent just catching the ball, so we're going to spend the majority of our time just working on receiving?
Yeah. I mean, that's an outstanding question, and that's kind of, just as a disclaimer, this isn't this isn't the only way to catch. A lot of people are successful doing other ways. For someone who doesn't want to spend a lot of time on receiving and want to go into blocking and throwing guys out, just because it's harder and all that, and it's more of a more critical skill, more of a complex skill. I guess what I'm saying is it's kind of, in my thought process, I want to be what's good at the game. And so if you devote time away from receiving and you spend it on blocking more, you're kind of losing the thought of how much you could impact the game, just because of how many strikes that you can steal and how many at bats you can change with receiving the strikes. When you look at it, you got to look at your identity as a pitching staff too, because ultimately that's the number one priority. And if you have a pitching staff where they block a lot or where they throw a lot of balls in the dirt, maybe you're have a higher percentage of performing a blocking skill rather than a receiving skill. So blocking might need to be practiced on a little bit more high frequency. It's basically feeling yourself and feeling the identity of what happens in the game more often, and seeing what your catchers are good at. If your catchers are really good at receiving, then that's a skill where we don't have to spend as much time on that, where it's more of a fine tune. We still come back to it. We don't abandon it, but we kind of just fine tune that and we focus on kind of what they're not good at. But all in all, I remember the quote, and I can't remember where I got this from, but it's be great at what you're good at. And, that's when I think of that question, and when I think of working at other skills and taking time away from receiving, I guess that's what I always fall back on is, focus on how you're going to impact the game. And that's in our catchers kind of at the end of the fall, they kind of see it through a lens of, man, I had a lot of opportunities to receive pitches this fall. That was my opportunity to impact the game because I instilled more confidence in them. Maybe you don't win that strike at the bottom of the zone, but the pitcher now knows that you're working hard for him, and he's going to have more confidence in spinning that breaking ball or throwing the fastball in, and he knows that you're going to hang in there and try to win that pitch rather than get defensive and just try to keep it in front, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think that the focus on the pitching staff and wanting your pitchers to really have as much confidence as possible in your catchers is really, really important. I can think of one catcher that I coached through the years in particular who was a really strong offensive player, probably our best offensive player, and he was a good receiver. He was a pretty good blocker. He had a really difficult time throwing guys out. He didn't have a great arm. He really had to work very hard at, being proficient throwing guys out. And there were times, I can specifically remember that teams would basically have the scouting report that this guy couldn't throw anybody out, and a team that averaged, 1 point something steal attempts a game would steal like 9 bases off of us. And that's kind of why I just kind of asked that question for any young coaches that are out there, whether it's, a high school head coach who's got to coach every position, or whether it's, as well as I do, that sometimes when it's your, I don't know how to say this, a lot of colleges don't have a catcher's coach. So it's like the youngest guy or the volunteer ends up being the catcher's coach because nobody else wants to coach the catchers. At least that's how I've seen on several other staffs before. So it's kind of like a guy gets thrown in there that maybe isn't all that comfortable just because someone needs to do it. And I guess for that guy who maybe is trying to figure out the best way to go about coaching his guys, if he's got someone who is better at some other skills and really has a difficult time receiving it, and like that guy's kind of afraid that other teams are going to expose that catcher and just steal on him all day, is that a situation where you would kind of change the priorities a little bit and tell someone like, hey, you might need to spend like the majority of your time trying to help that guy catch and throw, or do you think that receiving is so important that even in a situation like that, would your mindset still be like, hey, the most important thing is to make a strike and help your pitchers out? And, where would your priority be, I guess, if you were in that sort of situation, whether it was college or high school or any level, really?
Yeah, of course. I think that goes back to the identity thing. Just knowing what your catchers are good at and knowing what they need work at. If he's not as good at catch and throw, other teams are going to expose that, especially, from a stolen base standpoint. I think that's where you dive in more to the transfer work and the throwing the bags, and you just fine tune the receiving skill. A lot of we have two different sets of drills. You have dry work, which is basically everything without a pitching machine. That's without like a live setting. And then we have live settings where we go into pitching machine work and everything like that. And we kind of play above the game speed or try to mimic the game speed as much as possible. And so in that stance, I would probably go more into, from a receiving work on a daily basis, we would do a lot of dry work. Just fine-tune those skills, make sure our glove path and everything with our hands is working together. Not trying to spend too much time on it, but we're still trying to steadily progress that skill, and that kind of goes back to be great at what you're good at. But we would then, counter and spend the majority of our time in preparation for that team or in preparation of games if the guy's not essentially good behind the plate on a catch and throw standpoint. That's what we would dive more into. We would make sure that we fine tune the transfer work on a dry standpoint where I'm flipping them baseballs and he's steadily transferring it. And then when we get into a live setting with the infielders and base runners, we would really hone in on throwing the bags and being accurate and efficient. So I guess long story short, and just to circle everything together, and this kind of answers this question and the one previous, is just the identity. Knowing what your team is good at, knowing what they're bad at, and steadily fine-tuning the stuff that they do great, and then ultimately you have to develop and progress the skills that other teams are going to expose. If another team's going to come in here and we know they're going to steal 8 bags a game because our catcher isn't a good catch and throw guy, then we need to make sure that we're prepared with that skill. And I guess the main reason that receiving is just such a high priority on the list is because there's so many. Receiving is basically the only skill where it's solely the catcher. From a stealing standpoint, you have a pitcher time to the plate. You have his leg lift, his holds, his looks. How good is his move? How good is he actually holding the runner to the base? And then you're efficient and accurate with the throw, with the transfer and throw, and then a middle infielder or a third baseman has to apply a tag. So it's kind of, from when you look at it from those priorities, that's kind of why, or that's another reason why we go receiving first in that mindset. But as far as a catcher who's not good at catching and throwing, it's just knowing the identity, being great at what you're good at, and steadily fine-tuning the skill that you're great at. And then we have to prepare. We can't just abandon the skill because they're not good at it. We have to steadily progress it so that way another team doesn't come in here and expose our guys.
I can remember that year specifically, that to add on to your point, that our pitchers weren't. Our pitchers were okay as far as being quick to the plate. Some of them better than others. And our pickoff moves were probably as a whole, as a staff, were below average, I would say. And it was like the first team that really exposed our catching situation. It was like the most helpless feeling in the world in the dugout. Like, oh my gosh, like this pitcher's really slow to the plate today. Like, do you go out there and tell them to all of a sudden slide step? And we weren't really well prepared on that side of it. The pitchers didn't do a great job of helping the catcher, and the catcher was a below average thrower, and it was just like it was like an automatic double every time somebody got on first base, and it was the most helpless feeling ever. And I just remember sitting there thinking, like, oh my gosh, like we need to spend so much time on this in the next couple of weeks. Anyway, so going to sticking with receiving, one knee receiving is something that is gaining a lot more attention and something that a lot more teams are doing. You see a lot of it on social media. You see a lot more big league catchers that do it now probably than before. What is the big advantage of receiving on one knee as opposed to, your traditional primary and secondary stances as you have seen in the past with catchers?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of young catchers, and I say young catchers, I mean anybody, I guess, below the professional ranks. There are a lot of mobility issues. The hips are tight. They work out all the time. They're trying to get as strong as possible, just to be better at the game, and they lack the mobility segment of it. And that's kind of one of the huge advantages, in my opinion, of going to the one knee stance rather than the traditional stance. Just because there are a lot of catchers that sit back there and their knees get poked out, and just because their hips are immobile, and that loses us the ability to win the pitch in the bottom half of the zone. Even pitches that are ultimate strikes that are just a few inches below middle, and we end up bringing them down below the zone because we're immobile. So that's one advantage, I think, in my opinion, of going to the one knee stance. Another advantage is it opens up a lot of range of motion for the hand. Like I said, it gets that knee out that might be poked out. In our mindset, I teach a lot of guys to work from low to high. And it's really hard to work from low to high when both knees are kind of in the way and we're squatted back. If you go down to a left knee stance, you have that whole area right in front of the left knee that is open, and then vice versa. If you go down to a right knee stance, you have that whole area that's open. So as far as just advantages, I think it puts the guys in a more comfortable position. And it's kind of, you see guys, and I think back to me catching pins in college and high school, and when you're on your sixth or seventh pin of the day, and you're tired and your legs are just beat, and you wanna and you're just sitting there and you get down on one knee, and you ultimately your catching ability just increases just because of comfortability. The knees out of the way, you're really locked in on the pitch. You're not thinking about the legs being tired. So I guess that's another advantage, if you want to call it that, through a 9-inning course of a game. It kind of takes some stress off the legs because we are sitting on that one knee. The catchers are a lot more comfortable from it. And the one knee varies, pitcher to pitcher. If we have a pitcher that, ultimately spikes a lot of baseballs and throws a lot in the dirt, and our guy isn't good off of blocking off of one knee, then he's probably going to stick in the traditional stance. And I guess that goes back to the identity of knowing what your guys are good at. We have a catcher who's absolutely outstanding at blocking off of one knee. And he thinks it's easier to block off, in his mind and the confidence he has, he thinks it's easier to block off of one knee than it is off the 2 feet on, like the 2 feet on the ground traditional stance. And so, and that's awesome for him because he has that confidence. And we have another catcher who, sitting on that one knee isn't as great at blocking as he is off the 2 feet on the ground. So, for him in high block situations, I guess, where we're about to bounce the breaking ball, or, just runners in scoring position and it's a high pressure situation and he's not confident in blocking off of one knee, then we're going to stick to that 2 feet, the traditional stance that everybody's done for all the years. But I guess to circle back and answer your question, the advantages from catching off of one knee, I know it goes into a mobility segment. I guess guys aren't as mobile nowadays because the stretching and the flexibility work has gone to the background as the strength work has increased, and a lot of comfortability standpoint, these guys are a lot more comfortable catching off of one knee. They feel that they can really work their glove and manipulate the baseball off of one knee better. And for me, I guess that's enough for me to convince myself that one knee is ultimately the best position that we need to be in when you think about what happens in the game and how many times we perform the actual skills.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I like seeing the one knee stuff. It's interesting to me. I know that I caught in high school, and it was just, I was a guy that really, I could run a little bit, and I know that my legs would be pretty gassed. There was one year in high school, our catcher actually quit. So like the second game of the season, I was the everyday catcher. So I caught every day the rest of the year, and it really took a toll on my legs. And I caught in summer ball as well, just kind of kept it going, and I really liked catching, but it took a big toll on me, and I just kind of wonder, boy, if I had done a little more of that, done a little more like just one knee stuff, how much would that have just changed and just kind of kept me fresh and obviously helped with the receiving part of it. As far as just kind of sticking with receiving, Lukas, it seems to me just watching the game, college level, pro level, that there is more glove movement now, as far as guys that they catch it and there's movement after the catch than I've seen before. And I know that when I was young, kind of coming up through any camp I went to or whatever, it was always kind of like you want to have the least amount of movement possible. You just kind of want to stick the pitch where it is. You just kind of want to make the pitch the way that, and I've coached catchers at the college level, and kind of how I would phrase it to them is you just want the pitch to look like it is. Like you want to catch it exactly where it is and not try to pull it back, because then the umpire sees some of that movement and he might get a little perturbed and maybe not give you some calls. But now it seems like even at the major league level, like you can find guys that are moving the ball like a foot after they catch it. Whether it's from low in the zone to the middle of the zone, or whether it's on the outside corner back to the middle. But there seems to be just a ton of movement. Is that because do you have any theories about that? Is that because catchers aren't coached as much? Is that because it's just kind of a lazy type thing? Is that because is there a real purpose behind that? Do you just have any thoughts about why there's so much movement now in the game behind the plate?
Yeah, I guess the purpose behind it is, people have really dove into research and seen how many opportunities that the catchers have to increase their impact on the game. And ultimately, people who are manipulating the pitches the most kind of are saving the most runs because they're winning the most strikes. And it's not necessarily you're trying to trick umpires, but the umpires are calling them strikes. And when you think about it in that full circle of it, that's something that we need to do to ultimately try to help our team win the most games. I guess the extra movement, the way I describe it, and the terminology we use is it's quiet manipulation. You want to stay quiet. You don't want to do anything drastic back there, but you also want to manipulate the pitch, especially those borderline pitches, back to the zone as much as possible. And it's not for me, and I guess this is kind of where catching guys differ. There are a lot of differences in the catching guys, and a lot of catching guys think, I guess to call it, they want to bring it back to the middle of the zone. They want to present it at the very middle of the zone. For me, and how we stay in the most quiet, manipulative pace is, I think we just like to bring it back to the closest part of the zone. And that comes with some zone awareness, and because you're going to set up on the outside corner, you're going to set up on the inside corner, and you need to know where the box is of where the umpire is looking so he can call it a strike. But, it's just staying in that quiet manipulation mindset. The glove movement post-catch, we try to limit it as much as possible. We try to make the catch and the presentation look like a one fluid motion. Because ultimately, and this is just in my opinion, but I think if you make the catch and the presentation look like a one fluid motion, and so it's quiet, but you also manipulate it back to the closest part of the zone, and that's where you present it, I think that's where you can get the most strikes called, and without losing trust in the umpire. Because I think if you take a pitch that's 6 inches off and you take it back to the middle part of the zone, number one, a lot of people see a lot of post-catch movement, and it's loud. Even fans notice it, and then the umpire notices it, and now you can lose a little trust from the guy that's standing behind you. That's ultimately dictating a huge outcome of the game and it's strikes and balls. Just because that 0-0 pitch, if you go 0-1 or 1-0, it's a huge change in that bat. So I guess to answer your question for the full circle of all the extra movement and people moving, for me, it's just a lot of quiet manipulation. It's keep it one fluid motion. Get to the spot of the ball, build that straight line back to the closest part of the zone, and that's where we present it. If we get it called a strike, we get it called a strike. If we don't get it called a strike, we present it. He says ball, we take it out of the glove and throw it back. No harm done. We know that pitch was a ball. We had a chance to win it. We didn't win it, but we're going to keep working because he's ultimately going to throw another borderline pitch, and we got to win that one.
I like that mindset a lot better. I like how you said that. I hadn't heard it presented exactly like that before, bringing it back to the closest part of the strike zone. But it seems like one of the guys, and I don't mean to. I hate calling out a big leaguer, and I don't mean to do that necessarily. But I think of Gary Sanchez, and it feels like sometimes he's receiving balls that are like a couple inches off the plate, and he's bringing back to the middle of the plate, and it just seems so ridiculous. And he's not the only catcher, but he's just one of the ones that pops into my mind right now. But I like your thought process a little better, and it just makes more sense to me, just bringing it back to the closest part of the zone. Now, are you just doing that for borderline pitches? Are you doing that for anything that is within 6 inches of the plate? What are you telling your catchers as far as what's a pitch that you're going to bring back and try to win it, and what's a pitch that you're just gonna receive it an obvious ball and throw it back to the pitcher and not try to make the umpire, not try to sell that one to the umpire?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge feel thing for him. Just having a feel for the zone, like the zone awareness. Just knowing how far that pitch is off. I don't necessarily put a number on it, just because depending on umpire, depending on pitcher, how much maybe arm side run, how much sink, or how much his sliders breaking away horizontally. Things change in how wide the zone can be at times. So, I guess a determinant of it, if it's outside your body, it's more than likely an obvious ball. Now, that's not saying we can definitely win pitches that are outside of our body depending on where we set up on the plate. But, if it's outside of your body, it's probably more likely, obviously, going to be a ball. So we catch that, we throw it back. We're not trying to present every pitch to the closest part of the zone. If we do that, like I said, I think, in my opinion, you lose trust with the umpire, and when you're thinking of impacting the game, that's kind of the biggest impact you can have is in when you're stealing strikes. And if you don't have trust in the umpire behind you, it kind of just makes it non-existent that you can impact the game. So those borderline pitches, those are the ones we're trying to win. In my opinion, we should be 100% successful at obvious strikes, and that's just more likely if we're good with our glove path, if we're good with how we're working towards the baseball before we make contact with it, and we're taking everything back to the closest part of the zone, then I think you should be able to win 100% of obvious strikes. You catch it, guy calls it a strike, and you throw it back to the pitcher. There's no need to do anything to that pitch. Once it gets outside of our body, that's more of the obvious ball. We catch it, we throw it back, and we keep that trust between us and the umpire.
Again, that makes tons of sense. I think your receiving philosophy in general makes a ton of sense, and I think that for young guys that are listening to this, whether it's a young catcher or a catcher's coach out there, I think that's a good way to go about it. I guess I just always hesitate with guys that are moving the ball like a foot. And I just think how bad that makes the umpire look. But I also have seen, some of your drills and some other drills we have on the website, other stuff you see online, especially receiving the low strike, and just how natural you can make it look, to receive a ball that's maybe a baseball or two below the zone. And if you start below the ball and you're kind of working up word toward the strike zone as you're receiving it, how it looks so natural and doesn't look like a pull necessarily. It doesn't look like you're catching it and then pulling it in the zone. It's like one continuous movement, which I think that you mentioned. Is that sort of your strategy as well? And how much of that starts with just where you're set up before the ball comes in to put yourself in a position to be able to receive the ball and manipulate it a little bit and hopefully get the benefit of the doubt on a borderline pitch for an umpire? How much of that starts with your setup and kind of your anticipation of the pitch?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think, in my opinion, the way you win borderline pitches, it comes down to two facets of catching. And that's your stance of how you set up and where you're at, where you position yourself, and your glove path. And that's essentially just how your glove moves pre-pitch, and what it does before you make contact on the baseball. And that's kind of those are kind of the two constraints on that what set us up for success. If one of those are poor, if we're getting into bad stances, or if we're catching off of 2 feet when we need to be a 1 knee guy, or if we're catching off of 1 knee and we need to be a 2 feet guy, that kind of puts us in a poor situation and sets us up not to be successful. And so when you look at that, your stance, obviously you've got to be set up in a way to win the most strikes, to win the borderline pitch. And that's, I guess, going back to previous questions, that's a huge advantage with the low pitch is having that knee out of the way, and we can really work with the glove pre-contact of the pitch to manipulate it. And then with the glove path, I tell my guys, it's kind of it's first initially when we get into our stance, we want to present it where we want the pitch to be. At the college level, these guys know where they're going to throw the ball or know where they're trying to throw the ball. So we just want to give them a reference point real quick. And it takes a second. You give them the reference point of where you want it. And then for me, this is where it depends on each guy. Some guys go immediately to the ground. And I believe one of the coaches on Figure It Out Baseball called it a load. And I really like that terminology just because that's our load as a catcher. Hitters, they want to feel the rubber band effect and get loaded. This is our leg lift of what pitchers do in their windups. We're getting ready to perform our skill, so we need to put ourselves in the optimal position to do it. And we show the presentation of where we want it. We go down to the ground, go down to a couple inches below the zone, and that's a feel thing for the guy, depending on who it is and what they want to do. And then this is the most critical part to receiving that low pitch is waiting to move, and it's not you don't want to move too early. You want the ball to dictate what you do with the glove. If we move early, then our glove can get above the baseball, and ultimately we won't be able to win that low pitch, just because of the momentum of gravity from the pitch and the momentum of our glove. It kind of counteracts each other, and the gravity wins, and it brings the pitch down. So what we're trying to do is stay below the ball as long as possible. We want to wait to move. I tell my guys, move late, move at the last second. Those are just kind of cues. Obviously, we don't want to wait so long to move that we miss the ball and it hits us. But those are just cues to think about as the pitch is coming in. And then once we get ready to make contact of the pitch, we bring the glove up to it. We build that momentum from the ground. And the biggest thing is catching the bottom of the baseball, especially with that low pitch. And this kind of goes for everything for borderline, in my opinion. We're trying to catch the ball side of the baseball, if that makes sense. We're trying to catch the opposite side of the strike zone of the baseball.
As opposed to the strike side of the baseball. Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So it's kind of we want to build momentum to that pitch. When you think of beating the ball to the spot, we're not trying to get to the spot where the baseball's coming in. We're trying to get to that opposite side of the baseball. And this goes for glove side pitches, arm side pitches, down pitches, and up pitches. We're trying to get to the ball side of the baseball, the opposite side, and then that's when we've had momentum built. And we get to that point, then it's easy. All we have to do is build a straight line. We And as we're building the straight line from that opposite point back to the closest part of the zone, we just make a catch. And so it kind of, that's very, I guess, an elaborate way to think about a skill that takes under a second. But, you know, when you think about that and you think about the cues and then you actually do it, you see video of big leaguers doing it and you see video of yourself successfully doing it, then it becomes easy, and that kind of elaborate process is now fine-tuned into something very simple, and that's just beat the ball to the spot and build a straight line back to the zone. So it's a long process. You know, I love using the term Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, it's not, you're not going to go out there today and ultimately teach your guys how to win that pitch at the bottom of the zone. It takes countless hours of early work, countless hours of dry work where you're just flipping balls to them, of a variety of drills to do to mimic the glove coming from the ground and building the momentum. You know, it takes a lot of work, but when you see it in a game, and you know, just for example, when your number one pitcher, say your number one pitcher is 88 to 92 with a really good breaking ball, when he's winning that pitch below the guy's knees, you know, say at the shin, for example, because our catcher is really good, that makes hitting so much harder for the other team. And so that's kind of, when you're putting in these countless hours of doing it, when you think of the elaborate process, and you might say that's overwhelming, that's too much, but then you're able to do it, you see success, and then you simplify it, you know, and then you see what impact you can have on the game. That makes it all worth it, in my opinion. You know, that makes it all worth it. Our pitcher has more confidence. We're winning more strikes, so we're giving ourselves a bigger chance to win the game and keep their guys off the base. And then now, you know, with us winning those strikes, it can create just so many different things. You can instill just a lot more urgency in the opposing team of now they're free swingers, because they're like, man, this umpire is giving them everything. And now they're swinging at everything, and now we throw a breaking ball off the plate 6 inches, and they're swinging at it, and we get a strikeout. And you know, you don't want to compound things all the time, but you can compound it back to the fact of he swung at that pitch, and this might not always be the case, but he swung at that pitch that was 6 inches off because we won the pitch that was 4 inches below the zone. If that kind of makes sense and sums it all up.
Absolutely. So with you know, a lot of the catching work that is in your video, a lot of it is, you know, working low to high. What about when you have a pitcher who is one of those high spin rate guys who wants to work his fastball at the top of the zone? Are you starting any differently? Because obviously, if your load, like if your target and your load is below the zone, and you have a guy that wants to work at the top of the zone, it's a long way to go, and it's going to be difficult to catch that ball, to catch the ball side of that ball, and kind of, you know, keep it in the zone. Are your catchers working any differently for a guy who's got more success at the top of the zone than the bottom of the zone?
Yes. I mean, that kind of goes back to the identity thing of knowing who the pitcher is, and that just comes from countless reps of catching their pins and watching them throw. You know, your high spin rate guys, you know, we're going to put our guy back there who's most efficient with his glove, and there's no wasted movement, because if we have wasted movement, then we're ultimately not going to be able to get to that pitch up in the zone. We still keep the same thing. The glove pass idea for me is universal, and it's kind of stay in that low to high mindset, just because just when you think of it from a hitting context, you know, a lot of pitches that the umpires miss, they don't miss a lot of low pitches. They miss, you know, they kind of know where the bottom of the zone is. And if you're really good at that initial movement after you catch it, then they can extend it a little lower. You know, umpires miss a lot of pitches that are up. And that's just, you know, when you sit down, and we just use this example from a hitting perspective, you know, when you sit down and you look at the pitch at your belt, that's usually above your catcher's head. And that's usually right at the eyes of the umpire. And so, that is a pitch that they miss a lot. And so if we put somebody back there who's not efficient with the glove, or if we're not thinking of glove efficiency, then we ultimately lose that pitch, and that's a pitch that's a strike 100% of the time. It's in the box, but our umpires miss it because we never get to that ball side of the ball. And so it's difficult. It's definitely difficult. It's probably the most difficult pitch to receive when you're staying in that low to high mindset and you're staying below the zone and you're coming up to everything. But that just goes from the training environment of practicing it. When we set up we use hack attacks, and when we set up our hack attack, we're not just peppering the bottom of the zone. We'll mix in pitches up. We'll mix in pitches glove side and arm side. And so if we're universal with the glove path, then we're efficient with it, which means we're going in a straight line. We're not going. We're not having excess movement that's not helping us receive the pitch better. That's kind of how we catch the high spin rate guys. And that all goes to, the mindset behind when we get behind the plate of the guy on the mound. I guess what I'm saying is we'll know beforehand, where we're trying to work up or low in the zone, and this guy knows that it's a high spin rate guy. He's going to pitch at the top of the zone. So we have to be prepared to be efficient with our glove and get on top of the baseball and build that momentum from the outside of it and bring it back down to the strike zone.
Just one more, another question, just about a one knee type of thing, just for kind of something that popped in my mind. If you, it seems, you've said this, that you kind of like to go catcher by catcher and what they're comfortable with, and depending on their mobility, things like that. You might have a guy that primarily receives on 2 feet as opposed to receiving on one knee. Is that so individualized? This might be a weird question, but just thinking about for people that are listening to this and thinking like, boy, I don't think any of my catchers physically can do that. Would you ever, just if you had a group of catchers who just didn't quite have the mobility, or was just extremely comfortable on 2 feet, they're really, really mobile, really agile, and just very, very comfortable on 2 feet, could you ever see yourself having a full catching staff where everyone was a 2 feet receiver? Or is that something that's so important to you to go to one knee that you feel like you would work that into guys and hopefully get them to a point where they were comfortable with it again? Or is that something that just is whatever the individual catcher is most comfortable with, whatever he feels the most confident with?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And it's all about the individual. It's all about what he does successfully, what he does great, and what he does poorly. If I have if I have four catchers and all of them on an individual basis are better off of 2 feet, then we're probably going to catch majority of the time on 2 feet. And I guess when you have that perspective, it kind of goes back to the flexibility of a coaching mindset. And it's not, we don't want to cookie cutter this thing. We don't we don't want our 6'4", 225-pound guy to catch the same way as our 5'10", 180-pound guy when everything's different, when their strengths, weaknesses, mobility, everything's different. So that's kind of the same thing for like a hitting and a pitching standpoint. Everybody plays the game differently. And the game was played, I'm very close removed from the game, but everybody plays the game different, and yearly the game changes. The game's constantly changing, and it's kind of you have to adapt, and you have to put your guys in the ultimate best training environment, just the best environment in general for their individual success. We have a redshirt sophomore who's really good off of one knee, and then we also have a sophomore who's really good or loves catching off of 2 feet. And my cues and my terminology and the video I show them is much different from person to person. Obviously we have some universal things that all of us catchers try to do, but you just have to be individual, and you have to succumb to that guy and what's going to make him better in that personal standpoint, and not try to cookie cutter the whole staff.
a great way to look at it. I think it's it's a mature way to look at it. It's something I think is difficult for some young coaches to do. So it's great to hear that that you've got that. That's your perspective, and hopefully people listening to this will take heed to that. One more area, Lukas, I'd like to get into before I let you go for the day. Just want to talk about recruiting catchers a little bit. As a volunteer, for people that I don't know if everyone knows the rules, but currently on a Division I staff, you have the head coach, you have 2 paid assistants, and you have a volunteer. And the volunteer is not allowed to recruit off campus. So you're not doing any off campus recruiting right now, but you have in the past as a junior college coach. When you're out looking at a catcher, recruiting a catcher, what are the recruitable tools for a catcher that are the most important to you? When you're out watching a guy, what is a catcher that you go on the road and you see a guy and you're like, wow, I really like that guy. I really like him catching a lot. What does that guy look like to you in your mind if you were to build sort of a recruit that would really get you excited when you're watching him play a high school game or a junior college game?
Yeah, I guess the number one thing to always think about, and this goes for recruiting catchers and this goes basically for recruiting everybody in general, is, don't be afraid to get to work when the guy gets on campus. And that's kind of, don't, just because you see one thing you don't like, but if you can help coach it up and, we can work together on it and we can make that skill better, just because it's going to take some time or it's going to take some hard work, it's going to take some extra hours, it's going to take a lot of effort on your end, that's something to not be afraid of. And so that's kind of the thought process I use when watching guys is, I'm not afraid to get to work. And so basically what I'm looking for is I want to see, I guess, the intangibles, the stuff that's, I guess, going to be hard to coach or the stuff that you can't coach. Whether it may be how he controls the game or how he handles the pitching staff, how he's instilling the confidence, the nonverbal cues in between pitches or trying to talk his guy up in a tough situation. There's runners on second and third. He just walked the guy to load the bases, and he gets behind the guy on at bat 1-0, and you see a catcher fist bumping or doing something to instill that confidence. That's kind of that's something that's a huge attention grabber. And that's something I love. It's that like it kind of goes back to that's your whole purpose of being there is for the pitcher. You're serving the pitcher and you're trying to make him better, and you're trying to impact the game through him. And so when you look at it from a recruiting standpoint, you're looking for the guy who knows who can handle a pitching staff, can control the game from that, who knows the game, who has a lot of high IQ decisions. When it's 3-2, 2 outs, and there's runners on base, he comes out and lets the guys know that we're going to throw across. It's just kind of little things like that add up to know that it's going to be a great training environment with this guy when we give him our receiving philosophy, when we give him our blocking philosophy, everything like that. Obviously you look for the mobility. You look for the mobility to already be there, so that way you can give him. I like to call it. You give him a buffet of skills. You give him a buffet of drills. Hey, here's all the stances you can work from. Here's the glove path we got to use. Here's everything that we can do to be a catcher, and they kind of take what they want from it and they go back to their seat and they eat it, or they go back to their seat or they go back to the field and they use it. So you're looking for the mobility standpoint where you can give him the tools to succeed, and he's going to take it and run with it. And that kind of more dives into once you get to know the guy on a personal standpoint and on a character basis of, just because the high school coach says he's great or the junior college coach says he's a great person, he's a hard worker, and he's really good on the field, you still have to build that personal relationship with him, because if you can't connect with him or if you can't talk baseball with him or have an educated conversation with him, then you're not going to be able to coach him. You're not going to be able to give him a game plan when we are about to go face a top-tier team, and he's not going to know or he's not going to be able to relate to you on how to prepare for this game or how to get ready to play these guys. So, and that just comes from like a conversation standpoint with the recruit on a daily basis of making sure he's a high character individual, making sure he can, formulate and talk through his opinions. And you're not looking for yes men. You're looking for people who want to talk baseball with you and want to get on the ground and try to find a way to make their craft ultimately the best. And so I guess from a recruiting standpoint, you're looking for the mobility. You're looking for the skills. Obviously, you want them to be able to catch and throw. You want them to be able to block well. You want to be able to receive well. But there's a lot of stuff when you get to work in a good training environment that you can teach and help progress and develop. So you're looking for the intangibles. You're looking for the stuff you can't coach or stuff that takes 3 to 4 years to develop in the guy. So, overall, everybody would love a catcher who receives it great and hits 350 with double-digit doubles. So, but you can't. But that's a future big leaguer, and not all the time you can find those guys. So it's finding your niche, finding who's going to come in here and work right for you, and be able to come in here, control the game from behind the plate, handle the pitching staff, and really take to a game plan you give them and prepare for the game and be ready to go perform.
This might be kind of a weird question. This will be the last one, and I'll leave you with this. A walk-on catcher. Every school, usually you're recruiting 4 catchers. That's a standard thing. 2 to 3 guys on scholarship and at least 1 non-scholarship guy. Just frankly, because you need numbers, you need guys to catch bullpens. Not that it's not maybe the best thing to say that you're recruiting a guy just because you need a number, but you do. And you certainly have a lot of guys on a Division I team who are non-scholarship guys, and again, you need at least 3 to 4 catchers on a staff to be able to get through the season. A non-scholarship player who maybe doesn't have all the tools, maybe lacks something here or there, size, strength, a little bit of offensive ability or what have you. What would be a guy that you feel like if you have this one thing, if you could point to this, if there is this thing, if you have this one thing, this one tool as a catcher, you can probably find your way onto a Division I roster, and hopefully the rest of it follows, and you're able to have a good career. But this one skill is probably the most coveted, and something you feel like if you just do this one thing right, even if you don't do a lot of other things really well, you can probably fit in on a Division I team. Is there any one thing that you would point to that would be sort of that one skill for the catcher that maybe trumps all the others?
Oh, 100%. And that's kind of, and I guess it's an elaborate answer, but it's handling the pitching staff. And that's a huge umbrella, I guess, to lock into. So the fine-tuned or the specific skill that you look at is being able to receive. If he can handle the pitching staff, whatever role it may be, a defensive replacement late in the games, or you're catching a lot of bullpens. And if you're receiving the guy great and you're handling him, you know what cues to use, how to talk to him through his pitches, let him know how they're breaking, let him know how they're tunneling, let him know the speed difference of what the perception of the speed difference is to a hitter, just because you're catching it and you're feeling it right there. That's stuff that ultimately is just 100% yes. I get fired up about it. Pitching coaches get fired up about it when you have a catcher who can do that. A catcher is an extension of the pitching staff. So I guess when you're looking for that one skill, if the catcher is an extension of the pitching coach, if the catcher is the extension of the pitching coach, that's ideal. That's absolutely just great to have in a program. And there's nothing that you can do to describe how great of a feeling that is to have that catcher back there who knows the cues, who can handle the pitching staff, instill some confidence, and can ultimately receive at a great ability.
Awesome. Great outlook. Appreciate all the information, Lucas. This is Lukas Ray, everybody. He's one of the coaches at Charleston Southern University, Division I school in Charleston, South Carolina. A very young, energetic, and clearly a guy that's very passionate for the game. He got kind of a cool background. If you haven't watched his videos, if you check him out on figureitoutbaseball.com, he's got free content on there as well as a lot of other coaches, hundreds of videos on there for free. check out his bio. You'll learn some cool things about Coach Ray. He's got an interesting background and somebody that we're really excited to have on board here with Figured Out. And Lukas, I just personally appreciate your time this morning. You guys are mid-season. Well, not mid-season, but you're into your season right now in the beginning stages of it. And, for you to take this kind of time during the season means a lot. So I really appreciate your time and, all that you've given so far to Figured Out Baseball. And hopefully we can continue to have you as as an ongoing contributor, whether it be videos or podcasts or whatever. But it's been great having you this morning, and, look forward to staying in touch with you.
Yes, sir, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Figured Out Baseball is absolutely amazing. It's a great tool and a great medium for just everybody to use, whether it be young baseball players, high school baseball players, or coaches of all levels. It's just absolutely outstanding what you're doing, and it's great. And the best thing about it is it's free to subscribers. So that's great. It can help people internationally here in the United States. Cities, small towns, everywhere. It's absolutely great, and I really appreciate you having me on today.
Thanks for the pitch. I didn't even prep him on that. That he came up with that himself, guys. So, but everything he said is true. That's all the people we're trying to reach, trying to make the game more accessible to everyone, trying to make better coaching more accessible to everyone. And when you've got a whole, I guess our premise is to have a whole website of college coaches on here that guys you can trust, guys that have the experience that you're looking for to coach your kid or to. If you're a high school coach, who do you want to learn from? You want to learn from guys that are doing it at a higher level than you, and that's what we're really after. So I appreciate the kind words a lot. Lukas, good luck to you guys the rest of the way, and I think the future is very bright for you, and any team that you coach with is lucky to have you. So, again, I appreciate you being here, and best of luck to you and the team going forward.
Yes, sir. Thank you.